Three innocent children stepped onto a crowded beach during Australia Day. The weather was perfect. They were laughing, playing, having fun, and enjoying their freedom. But within just hours, these three children just disappeared, leaving behind nothing but footprints in the sand, sparking off one of the largest manhunts in South Australian history. But what actually happened to the children, and who or what is responsible for their disappearance? In this video, we'll expose the truth for the first time. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Hello, my name's Lloyd, and if you're a fan of dark true crime stories told in story format, then you're in luck, because that's all we do here on this channel. So go ahead, stab, shoot, or poison the innocent like button, but don't forget to wash your hands clean on the subscribe button, eliminating any chance of getting caught in the future. And with all that being said, let's jump into it, shall we? This is the dark and chilling case of the Beaumont children. It was in the year of 1966 on the 26th of January, Australia Day, a day of national celebration and family gatherings. The sun was glazing down on Glenelg Beach, and as holidaymakers flocked from all over to enjoy the summer heat, many were excited for the day ahead. Among them were the Beaumont siblings. Jane, she was 9 years old, and Arnna, she was just 7, and little Grant, the youngest, who was only just 4 years old. These three beautiful children were from a warm and loving family home in Somerton Park, Adelaide. Now it was that morning the children asked their mother Nancy if they could spend a few hours at Glenelg Beach. It was a familiar routine, and one that they've done many times before. With that, Mum Nancy, feeling confident that they knew the area well, agreed. And so at around 10 AM in the morning, the children boarded the bus for the short journey to the beach. Jane, being the oldest, was mature beyond her years. She had a little white handbag over her shoulder and held onto Grant's hand as they stepped on board the bus. And with that, Nancy waved them all goodbye, expecting to see them all again within a couple of hours or so later. However, little did she know that that would be the very last time that she would see them alive. Now, I'm not being funny when I say this, but I would never allow my children to go to the beach at that age unsupervised. I just wouldn't, especially on a day when it's going to be super busy there. However, back then times were different, I guess. Would you allow your children to go to the beach unattended? Comment below, let me know. Anyway, so they caught the bus that took them to the beach, and bear in mind they're supposed to be back by 12 o'clock midday. But come midday, the children had not arrived back home, and though Mother Nancy knew the buses on this specific route were running every 30 minutes, she simply assumed that they'd missed the bus and they would soon arrive home on the next one, and so she wasn't too concerned at this point. And just 30 minutes later, the next bus went past the house, and still there was no sign of the children. And then another bus passed by, and another, and then another, and still no sign of the children. And by 3 PM in the afternoon, worry had started to set in, with Nancy pacing up and down the front room, looking out the front room window and glancing at the clock, anxiously awaiting to hear the familiar sound of her children returning home through the front door. But that sound, it never came. And as the evening fell and the darkness struck cold outside, Nancy made a phone call no parent should ever want to make. She contacted the police and told them that her three beautiful children, Jane, Arnna, and Grant, are missing. And what would unfold over the next coming days, weeks, and years would become one of Australia's most chilling mysteries. A case that would change the nation forever and leave a family in a permanent state of worry and unanswered grief. The investigation began with urgency, as that night police officers searched Glenelg Beach, and the next day police officers began a mammoth task, questioning everyone who had been on the beach 24 hours earlier. And very slowly, small pieces of a timeline started to emerge. Several bachelors reported seeing the children throughout the late morning. At around 11 AM, Jane was seen purchasing snacks at the kiosk near the beach, and the attendant recalls her paying with a £1 note, something that stood out because Mum Nancy had only given the children coins for the bus fare and a light lunch. But there was also something else, something that would become the most significant lead in the policing investigation, because multiple witnesses described seeing the children in the company of a man. The man was described as tall, thin, with blonde hair, and appearing to be in his 30s. And that in itself is devastating to think about, but what struck investigators much more so was how comfortable the children seemed to be around him. And yeah, witnesses described seeing the children talking with this man, and even laughing with him, and showing no signs of distress or any indication of danger. And then, nothing. No one saw the children leave the beach that morning, and no one recalls them boarding a bus or walking away. It was as if they just vanished into thin air and leaving behind no trace, no clues, no answers, no nothing. Just a gaping hole in the hearts of a family and a nation.
Well, what can you say, actually? I mean, I know many people all over Australia really feel for us, and well, what can you say at this moment? I mean, we've been hanging on, and well, we just got to just wait and hope and pray.
Like, could you even imagine the horror? 3 young children just disappear without a trace, and from a crowded beach, in broad daylight. I mean, it truly is the stuff of nightmares. It's the kind of case that makes parents just want to hold their children a little longer, and a little bit tighter at night. Anyways, hundreds of police officers continued combing the beach, and as the days turned into weeks, the public's concerns deepened, as the nation started to realise this wasn't going to be a simple search and rescue, when in truth the Beaumont case was becoming something more sinister and far more disturbing. Now, the police called in an artist to create an accurate sketch of the man who was last seen with the children. The sketch was then widely distributed, appearing on the newspapers and on TV, and even in shop windows. But despite this widespread circulation, no solid leads emerged, and so with no immediate leads, the police intensified their investigations, starting with retracing the steps the Beaumont children had taken that day. But beyond the vague description of the unidentified man, there was just no tangible clues. It was as if the children simply had walked off willingly with this stranger, this man who had somehow gained their trust. And as the investigation progressed, tips began pouring in from across the country. Some claimed to have seen the children in other cities, others describing the man matching the accurate description and sketch. But as the officers chased down these reports, they quickly hit dead ends, with each lead ending in the same way as all the others, with no evidence and no new information. Meanwhile, this story continued to dominate the headlines. The disappearance of the Beaumont children had gripped the entire nation. People were desperate for answers, and as rumours began to spread like wildfire, many speculate that the children had been taken overseas by an organised criminal network operating in the shadows. The public pressure on law enforcement grew by the day, as investigators faced mounting criticism, which some questioned their handling of the case in those first critical early hours. But behind the scenes, the police had exhausted every possible lead. They knew that time was working against them, and that the longer the children remain missing, the harder it will be to find them. And as the days turned to weeks, the disappearance of the Beaumont children became a matter of national concern. Parents across Australia shaken, questioning just how could these children vanish from a crowded beach in broad daylight. The faces of Jane, Arnna and Grant Beaumont were by now everywhere on flyers, posters, bulletin boards and even on bus stops. In Adelaide, community members organised search efforts on all the local beaches. They searched the parks, fields and even abandoned properties, but still, no luck. Now, it was during the following weeks into the children's disappearance. The police tips line was inundated with calls and thousands of leads were reported. However, each lead required careful investigation, meaning officers travelled across the country, interviewing the witnesses, checking locations and so on and so on. But each time they would hit the same wall, because there was no evidence to support their claims. Oh, and if you think things couldn't get any worse for the Beaumont family, well, sadly they kinda did. And because Nancy Beaumont started receiving weekly letters supposedly written by Jane, these letters claimed that the children were alive and that they would soon return home, but the handwriting analyst cast doubts on their authenticity, proving them to be nothing more than a cruel hoax, and that it was the work of some sicko who was most probably seeking attention. And even though these letters could have well been a hoax, it's kinda creepy to think that maybe the person who was writing these letters was the same person who snatched the children from the beach that day. And why that wasn't viewed as a possibility is completely beyond me. Anyways, as the years passed by, the Beaumont case was never forgotten, as investigators revisited the evidence and eyewitness statements many times, all hoping a new perspective might reveal the truth. But without any new leads whatsoever, police soon turned all their attention to individuals in the area with a well-known criminal history. Like this guy, Bevan Spencer, a man with a disturbing criminal record linked to abduction and murdering young boys. He seemed to fit the description of the man witnesses had seen with the children. However, investigators questioned him extensively, and it turns out that he had a solid, strong alibi, and there was no evidence tying him whatsoever to the Beaumont disappearances. And so yeah, this was yet another hard blow for the police and investigation. A hard blow leaving the police and members of the general public feeling like this was just a hopeless case. And so the case remained at a standstill for years and years, and decades even. Many years later, a man named Hayden Phipps came forward, and he told the police a nightmare story all about his father. The man in question was Harry Phipps. Shockingly, he does resemble the man description in the sketch reports that was given to the police at the time of the disappearances. So who is this Harry Phipps guy? Well, he was a successful, high-flying, wealthy businessman, a millionaire. He owned his own business modelling cars, and he was also a member of the Adelaide Club, meaning he has powerful friends and connections. In 1983, he was awarded the Australian Medal of Service to the industry. He was extremely close to many MPs. He was powerful, connected, and a respected man, and to the outside world he was smart, charming, charismatic, kind and funny. However, Hayden Phipps was about to blow his father's cover, because behind closed doors his father was a completely different man. Harry Phipps was a bad-tempered man who was nothing more than a sexual deviant. Hayden told the police that his father would often essay him as a child during the nights. Yeah, he told the police during those dark nights, his father would often climb into his bed whilst wearing silk knickers and a silk dress, and then spend hours committing the most heinous sexual acts, often turning into full intercourse with his own son. This disturbing act of abuse continued for 8 long years, and 3 times a week.
Now, you told me before, we had a conversation before, and you told me that your father had sexually abused you.
Yes, violently.
Okay, so full sexual intercourse?
Yep.
Alright, how long did this abuse go on for, Hayden?
Until I was 14 years of age.
Like, this Harry Phipps was truly a sicko, a sick man who was driven by sexual dark twisted desires towards children, including his own son. Like, what the actual
corn casserole?
Worse still, investigators, they didn't know it yet, but Hayden was about to drop a massive bombshell on the police. A bombshell that would blow the Beaumont case wide open after 45 long years.
This interview relates to IFB file 080595WM between Bill Hayes and Hayden, H-A-Y-D-N, Phipps. Hayden, as you're aware, I've been asked to speak to you in relation to certain matters involving the disappearance of the Beaumont children. Do you understand what we're going to talk about?
Yes, I do.
You remember Australia Day 1966?
Yeah.
As a reason why? All right, but let me
It was a real hot bastard of a day. It's hot as hell, it must have been 40-something flat.
It's the day that the Beaumont children went missing.
Where?
They were last seen in the Collie visit.
I saw them coming into the backyard from the cubby house. They came to Dad's car.
How long had you seen them for? How long were you standing talking to Harry?
Oh, only long enough until he took them inside. Well, he took them inside.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I came out of the cubby house and went inside to see if it was going on. And the front door was open. So I just assumed they left out the front door.
Did you hear any noises or any squealing or any shouting or nothing? Any gunshots?
Yeah, we had some gunshots go off, but Harry's always letting off gunshots. That means nothing.
Do you think it was odd with the kids in the house? There was gunshots going on?
No, not in that place.
How many shots did you hear?
4.
Have you ever known him to be violent?
Very violent, extremely.
You were known to carry firearms?
Yes. He never went anywhere without a pistol.
You know what sort of pistol it was?
38 police revolver.
Hayden told the police that as a child, when he was just 13 years old, that he remembered seeing the Beaumont children with his father. But what makes this actual statement so compelling was the fact that not only was he saying that he remembers seeing his father with the Beaumont children, but he actually remembers seeing them all together in his own home. Hayden then told the police that a little later that same day, he heard gunshots being fired and then saw his father 10 minutes or so later loading up surfboard covers into the boot of his car. Hayden told the police that nothing really made sense to him back then because he was only 13 years old. And so, after decades of speculation and not knowing what happened to the missing Beaumont children, we now know who could potentially be responsible for their disappearance and their possible murders. Harry Phipps. Now, the police never got to interrogate Harry because he died in 2002, just before Hayden came forwards.
Let me give you an idea of the very close proximity of the distances and the locations. Glenelg Beach, where the children came to swim that day. Over here is Collie Reserve, where certainly the Beaumonts were spotted playing. Harry Phipps's house was a very short walk straight down that road right next door to the church.
This horror story immediately hit TV media, and yeah, it was a big deal. In fact, it blew up on TV media up and down the country, and whilst the case was being explained to the public on TV as finally being potentially solved, many more victims all came forwards, claiming to have been SA'd as a child by this monster. And as further victims came forward with their nightmare stories, so did a chap called David Harkin and his brother Michael. Now, at the time of their story, David was 15 years old and Michael was 17. They told the police that they were playing on their bikes just outside the Castalloy factory and that it was a hot weekend, when all of a sudden and completely out the blue, the boys were approached by Harry. He asked the boys if they fancied earning some good money. David and his brother, they said, yeah, okay, what do you want us to do? And that's when Harry said, I need you boys to dig a hole in the ground, 2 meters long, 2 meters deep, and 1 meter wide. And after 12 hours of digging, they were paid, and that was it, really. David Harkins told the police that after seeing the most recent news reports, that he knew he had to come forward with this information, including the location of where they dug this hole. That location was inside the grounds of the Castalloy factory. And surprise, surprise. And who do you think owned the factory grounds? Harry Phipps. And so now, finally, the police have a strong hold on a potential murder suspect and a possible burial ground of the victims.
When did it first occur to you that you might have actually dug a grave that day?
Only a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And what made you think that?
Well, there was, I was sitting at home, we were having dinner, my wife and myself, and tonight, had a documentary on it, and they named the Castalloy site.
So could it be perfectly possible that this case was finally about to be solved? Well, you just never know. The police had no time to waste as they arrived at Harry Phipps' home address, where his widow wife kindly allowed police officers to inspect the property. Inside the house, nothing really stood out or looked unusual, but once the police gained access into the garage, there, tucked away on a shelf covered in dust and dirt, was the little white handbag, the same style as the one Jane was carrying the day she disappeared from the beach. The funny thing is, though, when police officers asked to take the bag away for a closer criminal inspection, Harry's widow wife surprisingly said no. She told the police that she had only just bought it the weekend before, and so with that, the police officers left with no solid evidence. However, once the officers arrived back at the police station, something wasn't adding up. Something just wasn't making any sense. If she had just bought the handbag a week ago, then why on earth is it just left on a dirty old shelf in the garage, collecting dust? And so just a couple of days later, the police went back around the property. Once there, guess what? The white bag was gone. Apparently it was taken with no signs of a break-in. The bag just disappeared. And that, you've got to admit, is a little bit suspicious. I mean, that I smell some bullshit. And whilst all this was going on at the other side of the city, police were now digging up the grounds of the De La Hoy factory looking for bodies. And after months of digging, the detectives working on this case finally, and after all this time, in 2025, after all their hard work, dedication and determination, the police finally found right there on the ground nothing. No bodies, no bones, no nothing. It truly was a heartbreaking situation for all those involved, and even though police investigators strongly believe that Harry was without question the killer, investigators can only wait or hope for new evidence or witnesses to come forward, breaking the silence. And given the fact nearly 6 decades have passed since Jane, Arnna and Grant Beaumont vanished from the beach, many still believe that this case has already been solved. Sadly, Nancy and Jim Beaumont, they spend the rest of their lives searching for their children, searching for answers that never came. Every false lead, every cruel hoax chipped away at their hope that they held so tightly. Nancy died in a care home on the 16th of September in 2019 at age 92. Jim passed away at the age of 97 just 4 years later. Both Nancy and Jim passed away with the photographs of their lost children in their hands. So, what do you believe happened on that summer's day on the beach? Do you think someone still holds the key to solve this case? Was Harry Phipps the killer? Share your theories in the comment section below. And with all that being said and done, do stay safe and look after yourself, and I'll see you again real soon, the next time, when evil follows. Bye.